Night. Road. The radio played softly, some indistinct station. The DJ's muffled words were interrupted by static hissing. I was speeding down the highway somewhere between regions. I couldn't even remember which one exactly. The road blurred in my mind. I drove these routes often. Load up in one city, unload in another. Time was always money. I had left Kiev in the morning, and by night, I was deep in the provinces, where streetlights were rare, and the roadside dissolved into the black maw of the forest. The pine trees pressed in tightly from both sides of the road, as if trying to hide me from the starry sky. The navigator glowed with a soft blue light, confidently pointing the way, while I gripped the wheel tighter. Something about this road wouldn't let me relax. My speed was decent, but the truck handled smoothly. The silence outside the cab pressed against my ears, as if the air itself here was thick and heavy. Or maybe I was just exhausted. Long shifts do that to you. You start noticing things that aren't really there. Suddenly, the navigator beeped. A standard alert, usually warning of traffic or accidents ahead. But something about the sound seemed off. It was unnatural. A sharp, almost mechanical screech that pierced straight into my skull. I glanced at the screen. Route recalculation. For a split second, the display flickered, then showed a new path. The highway I was on was noticeably longer than the new route the GPS suggested, a time save of nearly 30 minutes. Did I hesitate? Not really. A trucker doesn't ask too many questions when he sees a shortcut. Logic told me to stick to the familiar road, but saving time overruled any doubts. I abruptly turned onto the new route, leaving the familiar highway behind. The new road was so narrow that, from inside the cab, it felt like the forest was breathing down my neck. The trees formed a solid wall right up to the asphalt, their branches so tightly woven that the headlights barely cut through the darkness. Well, so much for a shortcut, I muttered under my breath, feeling a chill crawl over my skin. The engine noise grew louder, the sound of the wheels echoing off the trees. I was used to solitude, used to the nighttime highway, but something was definitely wrong here. The silence around me was deafening, not even insects. No oncoming cars, no taillights ahead, nothing, as if all life had suddenly vanished. The radio crackled. The melody cut off abruptly. White noise spilled from the speakers. Then the sound began to distort. Beneath the static, I could make out faint, barely audible voices. I switched off the radio. "This is nonsense," I said aloud, but hearing my own voice only made it worse. The navigator suddenly glitched. The screen flickered. The route disappeared, leaving behind a blank, empty map. I tapped the device, but it was useless. The truck jerked sharply. The dashboard lights flickered red, and the engine let out a groan, like a man struggling for breath. I hit the brakes, trying to keep the truck on the road. The engine died. Damn it, just what I needed. I climbed out of the cab. Darkness surrounded me like a solid wall. There wasn't a single sound. Not even the wind stirred the leaves. It felt like I had stepped into a vacuum. In the distance, deep in the forest, I noticed a faint light. It flickered like a beacon through the thick trees. It looked like a window, or maybe a street lamp. A village? So what now, I walk? I muttered, feeling cold sweat trickle down my back. I locked the cab, grabbed my flashlight, and headed toward the light. Every step I took was accompanied by strange noises, rustling, twigs snapping, distant footsteps. It felt like someone was moving parallel to me, hiding behind the trees. I stopped, listened. Silence. But the moment I took another step, the sounds started again. When I finally reached the source of the light, a small village appeared before me. A few rundown houses stood along a narrow, overgrown road. Light shone from the window of one house. The rest were swallowed by darkness. "Hey! Is anyone here?" I called out. But my voice sounded muffled, as if the forest had swallowed it. No one answered. I stood at the edge of this strange village, staring at the only house with light in its windows. The other buildings were draped in shadow, looking old, crooked, as if abandoned long ago. Something about the house was odd. It seemed frozen. I called out again, louder this time, making sure I'd be heard. No response, only silence, so deep it made my ears ring. At first, I decided to approach the lit house. Worst case, someone there could call the nearest town or tell me how to get out of here. But the closer I got, the louder something inside me screamed, "Don't go in there!" The grass beneath my feet made no sound. My steps echoed as if I were walking through an empty hall. The trees encircling the village stood perfectly still. And that light in the house, it didn't flicker. It didn't sway like a lamp or a candle. It just shone, steady and cold. As I got closer, I saw that the door was slightly open. Inside, everything looked normal, clean, tidy, even cozy. A table, a couple of chairs, old paintings on the walls. A lamp stood in the center, its soft glow filling the room. But something was wrong, completely wrong. "Hello?" I stepped inside, trying to make my voice sound steadier than I felt. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, deafeningly loud. No one answered. I walked around the room, peered around the corner. Empty. I was about to leave when I suddenly noticed that the door, which had been slightly open, was slowly closing on its own. "Who's there?" I barked, turning toward the sound. And then I heard it. The first sound besides my own footsteps this entire time. A whisper, soft, almost inaudible, but definitely human. It came from somewhere behind the wall. I bolted from the house faster than I could think. My body instinctively told me this was not a place to linger. Outside, silence had returned. Only the light from the windows of that damned house remained. I turned back to look at the other houses. One of them seemed strange. Its windows were completely covered, either with rags or plastic sheeting. Suddenly, a faint glow began to seep through. "What the hell?" I whispered, feeling my palms grow sweaty. Then I heard footsteps behind me, clear, heavy, confident. I spun around, gripping my flashlight, but saw nothing. My heart pounded like an engine stalling at the worst possible moment. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved closer, then farther, never revealing who was following me. It felt like the sounds were deliberately playing with my mind. I moved deeper into the village, hoping to find someone, anyone. The forest loomed around it like a living wall, sealing the village in from all sides. Then, I saw movement in one of the houses. A figure flickered past the window. "Hey, wait!" I shouted, rushing toward the house. The door was closed but unlocked. I stepped inside, my boots thudding against the floor, and then I saw her. A woman stood by the window, her back to me. "Excuse me, my truck broke down. I just need—" I began, but my voice died in my throat as she turned. Her face, it was unnatural, like wax. Her nose, lips, eyes, everything was in place, but it was too smooth, too perfect. Her gaze was empty, devoid of expression. She stared directly at me. "You should leave," she said. Her voice was flat, monotone, as if it came from outside rather than her own mouth. I took a step back, but she remained silent. Then, she repeated it. "You should leave." I turned to go, and there, behind me, stood a man, tall, with the same unsettling face. He looked down at me, unblinking. "Leave," he said, in the same even tone. Something inside me twisted. A primal instinct whispered, "They are not human." I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't think. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might burst from my chest. When I reached the center of the village, I realized it had changed. The houses that had once been dark now glowed with light, and in every window, silhouettes stood, still, watching. I stood frozen in the center, surrounded by houses, surrounded by their silent, unmoving figures. I couldn't hear them, but I felt their eyes on me. Every inch of my body, felt their stare. I knew there was someone in those houses, but I understood they weren't human, step by step, and again. I walked backward, trying not to take my eyes off the windows. There were too many of them, multiple pairs of eyes in every house. They remained silent, but their silence was deafening. Damn, where the hell am I? I exhaled, feeling an icy sweat roll down my back. Then I heard footsteps again, this time not behind me, but right in front. A door creaked open in the nearest house. A man stepped onto the porch. He looked ordinary, an old plaid shirt, worn-out boots, but his face was the same as the woman's and the man's from the previous house. Flawless, emotionless, wrong, as if sculpted from clay. Slowly he raised his hand, pointing past my shoulder. "Leave," he said in a low, monotone voice. I turned. Behind me, a woman stepped out of another house, then another figure, and another. They were moving closer, surrounding me, without making a single sound. My breathing turned ragged, like a hunted animal's. I realized running toward the forest was useless. It still looked like a solid wall. My only option, get back to the truck, no matter how far it was. "Leave!" the man repeated. I'm going, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. They all stood still, like one shadow. Then, almost in unison, they took a step forward. That was the sign. I bolted, not caring about the path. My legs carried me, while behind me, the sound of footsteps, not a sprint, but slow, steady heels clicking against the ground. I glanced back, and my heart dropped. They were all following me, the villagers. Their faces remained still, their movements mechanical. One of them, a tall man, was the closest. His eyes glowed in the dark, like a predator's. No! Exclamation mark! I gasped, whispering hoarsely. As I nearly crossed the village's edge, the forest began to change. The trees pressed in, their branches tangling so tightly the flashlight was useless. Everything blurred, as if I was spinning in place. And then, I saw my truck. It was right where I'd left it, but it felt foreign, as if it no longer belonged to me. The cab was dark, swallowing the inside along with my last shred of hope. I lunged toward the vehicle. The footsteps behind me grew louder. They sped up. Now they were running. I nearly reached the door when I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, cold, hard, unnatural. I wrenched free with a scream, swinging wildly, but no one was there. I yanked the door open, scrambled inside, and slammed the locks shut. My whole body trembled. I panted, trying to collect my thoughts. I switched on the headlights. The beams cut through the darkness. But instead of an empty road, I saw them, standing in a tight semicircle in front of the truck, motionless, with identical empty faces. Without thinking, I turned the ignition key. The engine didn't start on the first try. My heart leaped into my throat. "Start, damn it!" I barked, turning the key again. The truck roared to life. I shifted gears, pressed the gas, but they didn't even flinch. They just stood there and watched. The truck's wheels rolled right through them. I shut my eyes for a fraction of a second, expecting a crash, a scream, anything. But there was nothing. When I opened my eyes, they were gone. The road ahead was empty. I sped down that cursed highway, not caring about the route, until the GPS flickered back to life. The screen lit up, displaying the old route. As soon as I re-entered the familiar highway, the phone in the cab rang. It was dispatch. "Where the hell have you been? We couldn't reach you for the last 3 hours," the dispatcher yelled. I said nothing, just switched off the phone and kept driving. Once I was back on the main road, I felt it. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. The forest was behind me. The road was empty. The headlights illuminated only the occasional road sign, but the feeling that I wasn't alone, it didn't go away. It sat deep inside me like a splinter. My hands still trembled on the wheel. My heart refused to slow its frantic beat. I wanted to stop, catch my breath, but something in my head screamed, "Don't stop! Keep driving." The night was fading. The dark blue sky began to lighten, promising dawn. Up ahead, a small gas station appeared. Deciding that the worst was behind me, I pulled in to refuel and grab some water. The place was deserted. That didn't surprise me at all. Who else would be wandering these roads at this hour? I killed the engine, stepped out of the cab, and slowly walked toward the lit-up kiosk. "Good evening," I said, stepping inside. The man behind the counter nodded without looking up from his newspaper. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and placed it on the counter. "Full tank and this," I said, nodding toward the bottle. The man finally looked at me. His gaze was strange, not scared, not surprised, just cautious. "Which road did you take?" he asked quietly. "Cut through the forest. GPS led me that way," I replied, trying not to sound uneasy. He frowned, set down his newspaper, and leaned in closer. He whispered, "No one drives through that forest. Not for years now." "Why?" I asked. "That road is cursed," he muttered. "They say people who take it, if they come back at all, tell stories, strange stories." "What kind of stories?" The man didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted off, as if searching for the right words. "Some see a village," he finally said. "Others see something else. But they all say the same thing. Whoever lives there should never be disturbed." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, and nodded. "All right, thanks." I paid, stepped outside, and headed back to my truck. But as I climbed into the cab, I noticed something strange, a mark on the windshield, as if someone had pressed their hand against the glass. From the inside, I froze. That's impossible. But the mark was there. 5 long, thin fingers, fingers that couldn't belong to a human. I shook my head, started the engine, and pulled out. I needed to get away from this cursed place as fast as possible. A few more hours of driving and then... The first lights of a big city glowed on the horizon. When I finally pulled into the warehouse lot where the loaders were waiting, daylight had fully taken over. The parking lot was bustling. People moved back and forth, loading and unloading trucks. Everything looked normal, as if the nightmare of the night had been left far behind. But as I stepped out of the cab, one of the workers approached me. "Hey man, you look pale. You all right?" I nodded, waving him off. Long drive. I was about to head inside the office when something caught my eye. On the side of my truck, just below the cab door, a mark, pressed metal, as if someone had left a deep dent, with fingers that could never belong to a human,